Nina, let me get you in. You're new to the National Alliance, and I understand the National Alliance is going to have a renewed focus on federal policy going forward. The question is, what is the federal role in scaling up? Could the federal government be doing more to accelerate the scaling up of high-quality charter schools?
So absolutely. And you and I used to work at the U.S. Department.
Let's see. Are you on? Press it on. Yeah. There we go.
So Mike and I used to work together at the U.S. Department of Education. You know very well that the growth in the charter school space, there's a direct correlation between the growth in the field and the amount of money that the federal government has disseminated to states. And that growth has continued over the years, and right now it has plateaued because the federal government just hasn't been disseminating as much money. So I think that the federal government has a huge role to play in this sector in terms of continuing to grow it. But I also think that it needs to continue focusing, as it has over the past few years, on making sure that we're scaling effective programs. And to some extent, in the context of the reauthorization of the charter school grant program, making sure that that grant is perhaps open to other types of entities, nonprofits, perhaps some high-quality authorizers, so that we're shifting the focus from growth to quality by being more measured in how we disseminate the funds. President Obama's budget, when he was running for president last time, called for increasing the budget for the CSP program to $400 million. He has not met that bar. His budget every year has actually shortchanged that goal. So I think basically calling for more money for charter schools should at the very least be where we start. But at the same time, I think we have to make some fundamental changes in how that grant is operating, and making sure at the same time that the traditional funding streams that are supposed to reach traditional schools are also reaching charter schools to the extent Title I funds, IDEA funds, 21st Century Learning Program funds are not reaching charter schools, making sure that within the statute, within the regulations, within the guidance, it's clear that charter schools are public schools and that they can tap into these sources of funding.
Okay,
Great.
Can I just jump in just 1 second? I totally accept the premise of the question, which is that the charter sector is too small, it needs to grow, and that we need to build on the success of the high performers as a central part, not the only part to be sure, but as a central part of that growth. But I just want to make sure we also, in our sense of urgency, don't get overly impatient, that this kind of change, if we really wanted to change public education from mediocrity at best to excellence, is going to take time. The cumulative effect of this over time is actually quite stunning when you look at where we've been, and even though it is sort of depressing to think how long it took us to get here, the fact that we are here, the fact that we've got a foundation for going even further and faster in the next 10 years, the next 15, the next 20 years, is deeply encouraging as well. So on the one hand, I totally get what you're saying, Rick, about there are a lot of things that we could be doing to really hit the accelerator and to change the model in ways that both build on our success, but also recognize that just doing what we're doing now is not the way we're going to get to the next level. But at the same time, I mean, the fact that KIPP has grown the way it has, the fact the charter sector in California continues to grow at a tremendous rate, these are all really encouraging things. I think we actually are getting there. So I just want to inject a note of optimism in the light of some of the limitations that we're still doing.
There you go again, Jim, with your optimism. I don't know. All right.
I won't do it again.
Okay.
I'm out. It's out of my system now.
And no, this is the optimistic part of the panel. We're going to get to the pessimistic later. One thing that Jim brought up earlier were facilities. Right? We've known for 20 years we've talked about charter school facilities. It's been a struggle. One solution people talk about is partnering with school districts. School districts have facilities. We want them. Can we work together? And that's one argument for making sure that school districts are a part of this movement. So I want to talk about that now. And I know many of you are from school districts. Greg, you came from a school district. Talk about, first of all, this idea that facilities are something that we can work together around with school districts. And more broadly, what is the case for keeping school districts within the charter school movement? Because I think there's some people up here who would say, you know what, we need to forget the district model. It's failed, it's broken, and we just need to move on and try to separate charter schools from that world as much as possible.
Sure. I think a couple things on authorizing and the question of what types of institutions make the best authorizers. They are school districts, state education departments, universities, nonprofit organizations, municipalities, independent chartering boards. What we've seen at NACSA when we look around the country is that no one of those institutions, types of institutions, is automatically a good authorizer or automatically not a good authorizer. That it really relies upon the people in that institution and their desire to do the work and their capacity to do the work. And there are many elements of school districts that are actually very advantageous to being a fantastic authorizer of charter schools. Not only the existence of facilities that you might be able to make available, but just the other expertise that is present in the organization around solving, special education problems. Many of the kind of substantive challenges of education, there are people in those districts that have that knowledge. What we've seen, and actually, Jed's sitting right next to me, the weakness of the school district model is that over time, they're unreliable. And I mentioned Jed because Jed worked in San Diego and Alan Burson was just knocking it out of the park as the superintendent of San Diego schools on charter schools, and then he moved on, and the district reverted back. And you can see this around the country in different places where a leader comes in at a district for a period of time and does a phenomenal job making facilities available, solving other problems, but then they move on. And the institution reverts back. This is a big reason why I mentioned our focus on the creation of statewide independent chartering entities in the future, because this will be all they do. This will be their core business, their sole focus, more likely to sustain quality over time because that is their sole business. Also, we think more likely over time to develop the capacity to really evaluate some of the outside the box innovations that Rick is talking about. That honestly might be a little bit harder in a school district to get something really cutting edge, different, approved through a school district where people are saying, well, I've never seen that before. So we think that model has some advantages. We still think school districts should be allowed to authorize charter schools, but we like the idea of a statewide entity having capacity and scale and expertise over time.
All right, now, a colleague of mine, Andy Smerick, who's been a part of this movement for a long time, has a book out saying we should just charterize everything. Our strategy should be replace the traditional school districts. And Jed, you've said, look, we're all on our way to New Orleans. It's a matter of how fast we get there, right? So does that mean we should basically give up on school districts and try to replace them with charter schools entirely?
So I think the general premise of we are all on our way to New Orleans, I believe, is becoming more and more recognized. The question is, how do we get there? How fast do we get there? To just provide some color from California. So this year, we will have opened 109 charter schools in the state. We will have increased charter school enrollment from 413,000 to about 485,000. So we will have added more than 70,000 students to charter school enrollment. It's the first year we've taken more than 1% of statewide enrollment into charter schools, and it looks as though next year is going to be a far stronger year. So something seismic, something very important is happening. At the same time, I think in an encouraging way, in the last 4 years we've opened 415 schools, but something that people don't know too much about is that in California, 125 schools have closed. And of the schools that we have data for, about half, almost half, were performing in the bottom 10th as measured by the instrument that we developed recently. So I think there is, endemic to the system, to the premise of charter schools, the capacity, to grow in this kind of seismic way. So what happens to school districts in the context of that? I personally think that it's just so hard to be a great authorizer, having been the authorizer for Alan in San Diego, having appreciated deeply the authorizing challenges that there are within California. It's so hard to do that well that we should get the parts of school districts that are focused on that, exclusively focused on that. We need to give the authorizers the resources to make all of the decisions themselves. They can't be dependent upon the other parts of the district, the legal office, the accountability office, the operational. They've got to be empowered themselves to do everything. And so then the part of the school district that is fielding a team, the part of the district that is operating schools, that's what we need to shift, literally shift into some kind of charter school context. So it is freed up to do these kinds of things. So until that day when our school districts go through that transformation, like an investment bank, separating the buy side from the sell side. Actually, I think breaking up the banks entirely to get these two different capacities freed up and focused upon is the day we're not going to, we'll finally see districts be able to play that transformational role.
What do you think about this, Jim? I mean, there's a lot of talk now, especially about portfolio management. Robin Lake is here somewhere from SERPI. A lot of enthusiasm for that idea, which gets into, it is similar to the, school districts having this portfolio of schools, many of them charter schools. Is this promising, or are we kind of kidding ourselves here that school districts are going to be able to sustain that kind of work over time?
Both. I think so. As a movement, I think the charter school movement, I think authorizes well need to take portfolio management seriously. Meaning when a district or a district leadership team comes forward and they say, look, we're trying to move towards a model where we have more diverse set of providers who are actually operating the schools, and we're providing more services and oversight and blah, 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 and we'll operate some schools ourselves. But what we're really looking for is more partners in this work. We ought to take them up on that offer. But we ought to go into it with our eyes open that, to the point earlier, that the folks who are in that leadership role may be gone tomorrow and things may go back to where they were before. But in the meantime, let's take advantage of the opportunity, if for no other reason than the tactical value of getting access to buildings, being able to expand, being able to create facts on the ground that won't change over time, that can be sustained over time, regardless of what happens at the leadership level. But then the other thing, which in some ways is more important, it may be less, there may be far fewer of these opportunities, is a more strategic approach to this, which is that, to the point Jed was getting at earlier, which is how do we get from point A to point B? Point A being where we've got effectively two parallel systems, one run by districts, one run by the charter sector. To a point where a charter sector is, or something that looks very much like a charter sector, is actually serving all students. And this is something that all of you recognize we struggle with in the charter sector, is that by the nature of the laws, by the nature of other constraints we operate under, we aren't serving all students, we aren't designed to serve all students. The district is the default provider of education for students in a particular geography, and charters try to serve as many of those students as they can. But if all really does mean all in the charter sector, and New Orleans is certainly wrestling with this first, but perhaps not last, we have to sort of think more strategically about how we move from the current sort of centralized managed command and control system to one that really is a true portfolio of schools with diverse providers. And therefore, when the idea of portfolio management is on the table, when there are conversations to be had with traditional districts about how to effectively deconstruct the system that they have, I think we need to be full partners there. Again, being fully aware that this could fall apart tomorrow when the leadership changes, that we may get 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But I think we need to be engaged in that process for our own interests, but also for the interests of this larger systemic change.
Michael?
Yeah, that's right. We've heard some notes of optimism, so let me turn to Rick to counterbalance that one.
I would just say, look, portfolio, fine, terrific, districts authorizing swell. What makes me nervous, however, is what some of my friends at the Gates Compact are pushing, which strikes me as a recipe for massive homogenization of charter schooling. Asking
and explain that. Well, raise your hand if you're involved in the Gates Compact in your city in some way. So a few out there. So explain what that Gates Compact is trying to do.
So Gates Compact, again, so I have no problem with districts authorizing. I think, Jim and Jed and Greg laid out pluses, minuses beautifully. What makes me nervous is it seems to me that the charter space is one space where we really have the opportunity to be free from a number of regs, from a number of requirements, from a number of federal and state provisions, from any number of things which force schools and districts to generally default to a model which is, I think, was really well suited to about the 1870s, but is not especially well equipped to serving our kids today. The Gates Compact is trying to get in a number of cities the charter leadership in the districts to work together in a collaborative fashion, in a way that's making facilities available to the charter community, in a way that's providing transportation and data assistance and other useful services to the charter community, but in return is asking the charter community to make a number of pledges. Essentially asking the charters to ensure that the representation of special needs children across the charters is going to be more or less mirror that in the geography as a whole, that the population is going to mirror, And what I worry about is, especially when you talk to this stuff, you talk to these charter folks, and you look at some of the paper they're signing, I worry that they are working themselves into a corner where they are going to dramatically restrict their ability to really think differently about school provision and how schools serve kids.
Okay.